Recording in progress. Welcome to Making Sense with Madi the SLP, where we're in the midst of making sense of responsive feeding therapy. This framework was revolutionary to me in my feeding practice, and I hope that you might leave this episode tonight feeling a little bit inspired. Tonight, we'll be diving into child-centered therapy with the fantastic Karen Dilfer. While this is a comprehensive series around a single topic, I do want to emphasize that the views, information, or opinions expressed by guests during the podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect the official policy, procedures, positions, or opinions of other featured speakers, experts, or organizations associated with the series. Each episode stands independently, and appearance on this platform does not constitute a mutual endorsement between guests. Additionally, this podcast episode is offered for point 0.1 ASHA CEUs. If you're part of the ASHA registry and want your CEUs reported, you must have your ASHA number and address in your speech therapy PD profile. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEU to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. With that being said, I would love to welcome you all to Making Sense of Responsive Feeding Therapy, Child-Centered Feeding Therapy with Karen Dilfer. Karen Dilfer MS OTRL is an occupational therapist, feeding specialist, and food enthusiast. She is trained in the Get Permission approach to pediatric feeding and is privileged to spend the majority of her time as a clinician working with children and families. Karen is the director of the feeding program at Amy Zier and Associates, a private pediatric therapy clinic in Chicago. She participates in research activities at the University of Chicago, where she works in the Department of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics. Karen is a co-founder and board member of the Chicago Feeding Group, a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families of children with pediatric feeding disorders and advancing continuing education for professionals serving this population. Recognized as a leader in the field, Karen is a sought-after educator and regularly presents for advanced practice platforms, including the Early Intervention Training Program in Illinois, Sooner Start in Oklahoma, and national professional organizations such as the American Speech Language Hearing Association. Hello, Karen. I'm so excited to have you on tonight and to be part of this conversation around responsive feeding therapy. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm great. I'm joining from Chicago. It's a pleasure to be a part of this series. There are so many wonderful people, so I just feel just really delighted to be here.
Well, I appreciate you for making my nerdy dreams come true, participating in this little passion project of mine. I'm always kind of like starstruck in these conversations because I get to interview the people that have really helped shape me as a clinician, and especially around this topic of responsive feeding therapy, like completely changed the way that I practice. So super grateful for all of you fabulous people, but especially you tonight, Karen, for being part of it. Um, I guess with that being said, we can jump into kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So, can you explain a little bit how responsive feeding therapy and child-centered feeding therapy overlap and go together?
Yes, that's such a good question. It's funny because I think like people are really good at saying this word. They're really good at using like child-led as a catchphrase, like, oh, I'm a child-led therapist. Funny story. This is a little bit of a off ramp, but I'll share it because I think it's relevant. I was treating a little guy yesterday. He was 3. He has autism, and he gets a lot of early intervention therapy. And I don't know his early intervention team because I see him through the University of Chicago.
Mm.
So anyway, but the mom said, whenever he's here with you and whenever you guys are together, he's so happy. But when he's with his other therapist, he gets so frustrated. And she said, the other therapist said that you should do more adult-directed activities because then you'll see how he gets frustrated. And I said, oh, let's talk about this. I said, you have put your finger on the thing that makes our approach, my approach, different from what you're seeing with your other therapies. And when I heard that, it made me realize that we are not here to get kids to comply. We are not here to get kids to eat. We are here to support kids to be the fullest versions of themselves. And, it was funny because I think when you are a child-led therapist, you just sort of feel that in your heart, like, I want to find the thing that's going to help them feel good. Maybe it's, calm and attend and regulate. But maybe it's the thing that they're just like really engaged in, the thing that they're super interested in. And when you can start from that as your basis, it changes your whole experience because kids feel seen. I think it really helps the connection between therapists and kids, parents and kids, right? It feels good to be together. And it really takes us out of our adult directed agenda. And we're not saying, we're here to get you to do stuff. We're here to say, we're having this shared experience and we don't know where it's going to go, but we have the skills and we have the perspective to be supportive and to guide it so we can, support you in whatever those goals are.
Oh, that is so beautifully put. And I think like what you just explained is kind of what was so revolutionary about finding responsive feeding therapy for me because I did start off doing feeding therapy from a very adult directed lens and I inherited some hierarchical, that word's tricky for me tonight, goals. And I was like, oh, well, we have to interact with it this way. Now we have to interact with it this way. And the kids hated coming. I hated coming. Nobody was having fun. The kids were dysregulated walking in the door. And it didn't feel good for anybody. And so like being even like child led feels like you said, like you feel it in your heart, like oh, this feels more right. Because like if we don't want to be in a place, how are we going to learn in that place, you know?
One of the things I think about a lot is almost everybody who ends up being a therapist, OT, SLP, PT, whatever, we're coming at our work from a good place and we
Hmm.
want to do the best that we can. And I don't know about you, but at least for me, or at least maybe a little bit earlier in my career, I had that voice in my head saying, Karen, it's your job to do all the good therapist things. It's your job to make change. And so I felt pressure from myself to behave in a certain way. And sometimes I think it's that agenda that sabotages the child-led nature. Because if we're truly child-led therapists, yes, we have a professional skill set. Yes, we know the direction that we're going, the general direction, but everything else is a little bit fuzzier. Because when we are truly being responsive, we understand that the therapy is the dance between the child and us, right? It's not like we're going down the checklist and doing all the activities. We're modifying and changing and making things up on the spot. And I really think that that's the beauty of responsive feeding, because if you're being responsive, your plan changes the whole time, changes
Hmm.
over and over again as you're working with the child. And I think that's actually really hard as a therapist. I mean, I think that when you're a newer therapist, that can be just so intimidating to be like, oh, I don't want to say make it up as you go, but you're kind of thinking on your feet and responding in the moment. And that in itself is a skill set.
Yeah, it's definitely one that I'm continuing to evolve and grow in. And I really appreciated you like acknowledging like that parent coming and be like, you need to do like we're told you need to do more adult directed activities, and you being so firm and solid in your approach and your foundation that like that didn't make you say like, oh, okay, let me think about that. I'll get back with you next week. But you're like, oh, hold on a minute. This is how I do things and this is the why behind it. And so like I just having that I don't know, like that confidence in that because I definitely like kind of that conundrum that you talked about like, oh, we have to do these things and what are we doing? And like we have to move through the things and like I'm the therapist. Like I definitely still struggle with some of those thoughts. So I'm going into my 6th year of practice, or I guess halfway through my 6th year of practice. And so I'm becoming more confident with that, but it's something that kind of still I hear the whispers at the back of my head. So it's so nice to hear you kind of show like continuing down this path, like where you can be at, and then also kind of validating that we all kind of had those thoughts starting off.
Absolutely. I mean, I still have those thoughts. I think most therapists have those thoughts, You
Hmm.
go in and you're applying your professional training in the best way that you know how, but we're dealing with really hard situations most of the hours of the day? So the answer isn't always straightforward. But I also think that's part of being responsive and being child-led is that there's a level of saying, like, I'm going to try this and I'm going to see how they respond and then I'm going to adjust, right? I might not get it right 100% of the time. I won't get it right 100% of the time, but that's okay. I don't have to get it right 100% of the time.
Hmm. Um, I man, so many like good little just like nuggets of wisdom already, Karen. Oh my goodness. Like I don't have to be right 100% of the time, but like as long as we're doing our best and then we're reflecting and like when we recognize those shortcomings, we're like learning from them and growing from them in the
You
future.
know,
Oh.
When you were so gracious to read my whole bio, and one of the things that you might notice when you read it is that I spend a lot of my time working at an outpatient private practice in Chicago. Amy Zier and Associates is the name of the practice. It's great. I would recommend it. And really, this practice functions a lot like a pediatric mental health center.
Mm.
And it's really interesting to practice out of that setting because one of the things that we are trained and coached and supported in as a team here over and over again is that it's about the relationship and it's about the connection. And that's the foundation of the work that we do. And really, I think that that relationship and that connection comes from having that individual approach where we look at each kiddo and we say, oh, what do you need today? What do you like? What feels good to you? What's fun? And then
Mm.
that's the starting place. And that's a little bit different than some of the other therapeutic approaches that, you might have been trained in or might be familiar to you as a professional.
So being a child-led feeding therapist, so okay, so first off, let's maybe touch on like how child-led feeding therapy kind of supports the values of responsive feeding therapy. And so if you didn't listen last week, our values of responsive feeding therapy are under pressure. Let me see if I can get them. So you have autonomy, relationship, competency, intrinsic motivation, and holism. So one that's kind of already sticking out to me. Well, I guess relationship and autonomy are both kind of sticking out to me when you kind of just think about child-led. But do you want to dive into that a little bit more, Karen?
Yeah. Um, you know, Feeding never happens just to the child. Feeding is always something that caregivers and kids, parents and kids are always doing together, right? So we're never just talking about like the kid, the child. We're always talking about pairs, right? The dyad. And so I think in some ways, like it makes sense intuitively that, we're always thinking about like the pair. But the thing maybe where I would encourage people to think about is, could that relationship maybe be more mutual, right? Or maybe could that grown up support enjoyment, support motivation as something that is inherent to the activity? It can be really easy to be the mealtime partner and to just like be a little pushy or a little coercive or to have a little bit of your own agenda. And I think truly when you're child directed, you are not going down that path, but you're saying what feels good to you, right? Child, patient, the person you're with, and you're not just looking at them as a like a situation to be fixed, but as a person with preferences. Maybe you're looking at them in the moment. Like, I mean, I know I can think of a couple of kids who I've treated last week where they walked in the door and we went, "Oh, you don't look so good. You had a rough day." School is starting in Chicago this week, so everyone is like in a state of like fluster as like the big transition to school happens. And I think in those moments we're saying, "Oh, like." We're going to maybe do something different or find something to help you get back to a good place, right? Whatever that means for you. And so I think that requires a level of just being able to assess, to read kids, to understand them as individuals, and then also be flexible enough to pivot and to figure out what's going to be the thing that's going to be meaningful in the given moment.
I find that I have to do that so often with my sessions because I don't know, especially like those after school kiddos, you have no idea what kind of day they came in or how they're coming in. So I don't know, sometimes it's like you really have to pivot and switch. One thing that I find really beneficial with my patients is like sometimes, especially if we have a lot of worry around food, I start the session with like a game or a preferred activity with like no food involved at all and just like connect with them like as the person, the human they are in that moment. And then you can find out a lot about how they're feeling during the day. Like I had this one little lady and she was like, "Oh, I was so really school had started for us 2 weeks ago." And she was like, "Oh, I was just really nervous that the line was really long and I didn't know if my parents were going to pick me up and I'm still feeling scared." And I was like, that is so great to know. And if I wouldn't have like taken that moment to connect with her to see how she was doing, there was so a previous season of Making Sense, we did selective eating, and Marsha Dunn Klein was on one episode, and something her episode is called "This Child in This Moment," and it really stuck with me. And so, like, if I'm not seeing this human being in front of me as the person they are in this moment, how are we going to have a productive therapy session? And so, like, taking that time to just be with the child doing a preferred activity that like they pick out I found it to be so meaningful in my practice, and it really sets the tone for like what's to come in the session.
Totally. I love that. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is so many of the kids that we see at Amy's Ear at the Playhouse here struggle with anxiety in all different forms, right? Related to food, maybe global anxiety, social anxiety, right? There's lots of ways that anxiety can manifest itself. And one of my most favorite ways to support kids through that is by opportunities for movement and play. We know that when kids are moving, maybe they're jumping, they're crashing, they're getting rhythmic movement. You can't see this, but there's a trampoline next to me here, right? When kids are given those opportunities, I think it just kicks their nervous system down a notch. It helps them be in their bodies. And I think it can really help an authentic connection. So if you are a therapist and you're listening and you have the opportunity to bring your patient client to the gym or to the movement space in your clinic or hospital, like experiment with that. I can think of some really wonderful sessions I've had with kids and parents where like we're playing, we're moving, we're swinging, but like maybe we start talking about our favorite food, or maybe we start talking about the thing that we're going to do in a minute, or the thing that becomes what we're going to do in a minute. And a child maybe wouldn't be willing to have that conversation if they were just sitting and feeling nervous about what's going to happen next and what are they going to make me do. But in the context of moving and of play, those things can happen more naturally and just feel more comfortable for everybody involved.
Oh, that's a really interesting idea. This one little lady that I was thinking of, I see her in her home, and so she has access to some movement things, and there's some days like that's the thing that she chooses. And so it's interesting kind of seeing her like naturally falling into that movement, and knowing that she's like a more like anxious child. I wonder if like that's like her body seeking out like that regulation.
Yeah.
Um, I do have a question. And so this is something that I've been struggling with lately. I've listened to some talks where it talks about like play. If play is adult directed in any capacity, it's not truly child led. However, like some of these kids have a really hard time interacting with food. And so like if I'm if I choose we're doing like a food craft for that day, like one, is that responsive? But two, how do you like get the topic of food? Like, is it okay to present the topic of food? And does that make me not child-led?
Yeah, such a good question. So I think there's a couple things worth to address in the question. I think the first thing is, sometimes I think when we talk about play in the context of feeding therapy, I get stuck
Mhm.
because when I think about play, I think about my DIR training. And I think about connection and reciprocity and symbolic play and perspective and like all those things. That's where my OT brain goes. And I think sometimes when people use the word play in the context of feeding therapy, it becomes this like sneaky thing that we're using to get, it's like it feels good, but we're really like using it to like get kids to do things, right? And then that's ultimately where it's not responsive.
Mm.
So in my brain, I actually don't love the word play when it comes to therapy. I think for myself, I want to have a playful posture. I want to be responsive. I want to be supportive. I want to be a fun person to be around, right? When I'm a therapist, all my whole life, but especially as a therapist. So I think, maybe thinking about your perspective and your interactions in a more like playful, lighthearted way, that could be one place to start. And then the second thing I always think about is what's meaningful for the child? What's interesting? Um, Example, I had a little girl who is a very anxious eater. She came in last week and she had been to the dentist. And what did the dentist do? The dentist, after he did her, cleaned her teeth, gave her a strawberry ring pop. And so she came in and was telling me all about how much she loves strawberry flavor. And I was like, I had no idea you like strawberry flavor. And so we started talking about strawberry flavor. We went through the fridge, we found some strawberries, we cut up some strawberries, we smelled them. And I didn't have this on my agenda, right? But
Hmm.
for her, that she was thinking about that, it was meaningful. She was enjoying the ring pop that she brought with her. And it was actually through that we ended up making a smoothie, which she didn't drink, which was fine, but she was excited to make it. And then we froze it into popsicles. And then when she came back the next week, she gave one to her mom because the mom came in the session and was like, "Oh, I'd love to see your popsicles," right? She felt celebrated and loved and supported. And then after she watched her mom eat it, she said, "Okay, I'm going to eat it." And then she ate two strawberry popsicles, which she had never had before. So I could not have dreamed up that scenario. Like, it's just kind of like what happened. But I didn't go in there being like, "Oh, I'm going to get her to play with strawberries." I went in there being
Mhm.
like, "Oh, what's going on today?" And she identified that interest, and then we were able to partner together because for her, that was the meaningful thing.
How did you build that relationship with this child to the point that she came in and said, I tried a strawberry ring pop and I like strawberry flavors? How did you like How did you guys get to that point where she had like the taking back to like the responsive feeding values, like she had the relationship with you, she felt safe enough to like bring that to you. She had like the autonomy to like tell you what she was interested in exploring. And she obviously felt competent enough to like interact with cutting up the strawberries. So can you kind of explain like how like what was the foundation that you laid for her to like get to that point? Because it's not, I have had a few sessions where a patient comes and they're like, whoa, I tried this, or oh, there was this thing. But then there's a lot of patients where like that's not where we're at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a little girl who I've worked with for a while. I actually saw her a number of years ago and then they stopped because the family moved and they did a bunch of things. But I've been seeing her over the summer, so I've probably seen her, I don't know, 5 or 6 times consecutively. So she knows that when she comes here, we kind of have a routine of things that we do. She's given choices. The way that our clinic is set up is there are different rooms that are named after animals. She gets to pick the room. We play together. It's usually a movement game, but not always. Do all sorts of different things. It's usually different. She knows that she's going to have autonomy over the play. And then we usually do some sort of activity in the kitchen. And it's sometimes there are things that I pick based on what I know that she likes or conversations we've had with her mom. But there are always things that are very carefully chosen because we're like 80 to 90% sure that it's going to be positive for her. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes we get it wrong, and then we stop, we repair, maybe we pivot to something else, maybe we call it a day. But there's a little bit of a rhythm to the her time here that I think makes it predictable for her. The other thing is that she knows when she says no, whether in play or in a kitchen activity or eating, she knows that her no means no, and no one is gonna force her, coerce her, make her kiss it goodbye, right? Like we say, okay, like, that's it. So, so I mean, I think part of the answer to your question is, we're looking for things that are, when I say things, we're looking for therapeutic activity and foods that are meaningful for the child and are going to be pleasurable for the child, enjoyable for the child. Maybe like have an application, right? Everyone's going to school right now and talking about like school lunch. Like there's lots of things that we can do to think about that child as a person and that child's life. And I think that starting there is a way better place than saying like, oh, well, we're just going to play with food.
I really appreciate you kind of making that like shift from like we're not playing with food, but we're being playful with food. Um, that makes that feels a lot better to me and it aligns more with how I feel like I'm doing my sessions. I get kind of caught up sometimes because like, well, you have to play to learn. Um, but I appreciate the permission to be playful. Because I think that is a big part of it. And I also love the emphasis on like respecting her no. I think that goes such a long way with kids feeling more okay and being willing to be a little bit more adventurous or step out of their comfort zone because they know if they make that choice of their own accord to step out and then they get uncomfortable, they decide they want to take a step back in, that's gonna be okay. Because like I know if somebody wants me to do something that I'm kind of nervous about and I know there's not a way I can like nope out, I'm gonna be a lot less likely to like initiate that activity because like what happens if I get in there and I don't like it and I can't leave? So I'm just like not gonna do it. Um, so I think that goes such a long way with these kiddos. Um, so do you have any recommendations for where you start to be child-led if you have like a really highly anxious kiddo, um, who they're a long way away from coming and saying, I tried a new strawberry ring pop and I want to explore strawberries, or I think I like this flavor. Do you have any tips for like where to start? Like whenever you're just starting with a kiddo, you don't have that relationship and kind of how you come in with your therapy plan loosely?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Can I tell you a story of something I messed up on one time? Because I always think
Yeah.
that we don't always do a good job talking about the things that we get wrong. I worked with a family here, and I think I had seen them for one visit, and the first visit went great. And the second visit, the mom had brought, we always tell families to bring food. We usually have food here, but we say, bring, it's usually like a couple preferred things or, family foods. Depends on the child what the specific thing is. So she had like a plastic grocery sack that had some family food in it, and they were coming here, and the child would not come into the clinic because he saw the food in the bag and he was so anxious that, oh my gosh, I see what's going to happen. They're going to make me eat it. And I said, oh wow. So he actually never made it in. We decided that he was really worried and it wasn't a worthwhile thing to try to get him in the door. So we called it a day and we worked from there. But I will never forget that child because it's made me realize that for a lot of kids, food interactions might not be where you start, right? Especially if we're talking about kids that are really have very specific preferences and need things to be a certain way. So whenever I meet a child for the first time, usually, it's can they have a conversation about food, right? Or what does that conversation look like? One of my most favorite activities to do with kids I haven't yet met, if they're old enough, is to draw a picture of your favorite food or a favorite meal time. I actually got that activity from Jenny McLaughlin, so all credit to her here. But having that activity as a way to be together, have that relationship, and talk about like what are you like? What are preferences? I think that having preferences around food is a very human thing. Most people can connect over that. And so we're not saying, we're trying to change you, we're trying to figure out what you don't like, but we're just saying, hey, like, what feels good to you? And that can be a really nice way to start the conversation. Other kids are more open to eating maybe a familiar food in a new place or a familiar food in a familiar place with a new person, right? So for some kids, we'll say, oh, like, I learned that you really like peanut butter crackers. Maybe we could eat some together, right? And for some kids, being able to eat for that familiar food in a new place is challenging, and that's where we start. For other kids, it's okay, right? So we're trying to very carefully tiptoe and figure out what is working, what feels good, what can you do comfortably and successfully. But then also, like, maybe where do things get trickier? Where does it begin to feel hard? Because I think therapeutically, that's where we can begin to say, okay, we see what's going on. This is where we can begin our work. But
Mhm.
if I were to say something that I see when I work with other therapists, it's that I think oftentimes like we're starting too high, we're starting too hard, we're making the challenge too big. I think especially in those initial meetings with kids, we want things to feel really good. We want it to be easy. We want it to be familiar. We want it to be enjoyable, right? Because when therapy or meal times are enjoyable, they feel good, they're familiar. I think that's when kids like begin to go, oh, I like this. I can trust this. They're listening to me. It feels good. And that really helps to build internal motivation and also that sense of safety that I know you all have talked about in previous conversations.
I recently had a kiddo who they weren't keeping one of his favorite foods in the house.
Mm.
And so after we talked, and like lots of parent coaching and like mom read some books and did some independent research, I got there one day and she had the favorite food in the kitchen. And the kid, like I was talking with the mom, and then he came into the kitchen and he goes, my food, my favorite food. This is the best day ever. Can I have some more right now? And that was the first, like I had been seeing this kiddo for like 2 or 3 months at this point, and that was the first time I had ever seen him initiate like asking for food. But he felt seen and safe, like he felt that perceived safety having access to his food. it was his preferred food. And then we had like a really great interaction with me and him, where we got to like, I didn't get to have any of his favorite food because they were his food, but I got to eat my own snack that I had brought that day. And it was perfect. But before mom had done that, I had been bringing his favorite food into my sessions. And I feel like me providing that favorite food created a lot of trust between us. And it made him really excited because he knew that whenever I came, we were going to eat this chip together. And it was really exciting because we got to eat the chip together. But it was really cool seeing, I don't know, just having kids having access. Like this kid, he was one where like, we had to start with eating his preferred food together. But then just kind of seeing that in real time, like this kiddo, like his preferences being like honored and accepted by his family and that food being present in the home was really meaningful to me and just really cool
And
to
when
see.
I hear you say that, I'm hearing that you're saying, I see you as a person. And I think one of the traps that sometimes we fall into as a profession is that we say, oh, like, oh, well, relationship is important. Oh, connection is important. But like there's a level of like artificiality to that. Or like a therapy, like a sort of a fake therapy version of that. And everything that you shared just was like so authentic. And again, if you think about yourself in your real life, like maybe you think about yourself as an eater, like I love to go out to eat with my friends, right? I can think about one of my best friends in Chicago is vegan. I'm not a vegan, but we always eat vegan food together. And I love eating with him. Like we have so much fun. He's introduced me to so many good things. But like that time to be together and eat the food that he loves has been a point of connection for us. And I think that, when we are able to kind of make those connections with our clients, like that's when therapy begins to feel really good because there's a level of authenticity that sometimes I think is left out of the situation, left out of the therapy.
That I totally agree with that. I feel like I don't know if it's finding responsive feeding therapy or child-led therapy or trauma-informed therapy. I don't know what it is or if it's just me growing as a clinician. Um, but I've definitely found the more that I've practiced, the more that I'm just kind of myself. Like I feel like when I first started off, like I was like SLP Maddie was doing all of the therapy and I had like my SLP hat on. I was the therapist. But then it's so much more fun when you're just kind of getting to be yourself and, like play around with the kid or like, I really love like the school-aged boys where they're like really competitive and you can kind of like be competitive with them and stuff. Like, I don't know, like being able to like joke around and have fun and like you said, like connect with them authentic.
Authentically. Yeah, yeah,
There we go.
yeah.
Y'all, it's been a day. Thank you for that, Karen. Um, it's just so much more fun and you can connect so much more. Um, and so I haven't taken any DIR coursework yet, but it is like on my to be taken list, which is very long, but I will get there one day. But I was at the Feeding Matters Psychology Summit on this past week, and they had this early relational health presentation, and they talked a little bit about isn't it Stanley Greenspan that started DIR? So they had one of his quotes, and it was that like, oh, I'm gonna kind of butcher it, but the gist of it was um, learning happens through relationships. And so, like, the more connected that we feel, the more in tune that we feel with those around us, the more likely we are to have like a meaningful experience that will like lead to like more impactful learning. And I just thought that was, I mean, it's really beautiful and like a good reminder. And without having taken like the formal coursework or hearing that before, I've definitely been kind of just naturally finding that as I kind of like embrace my authenticity and like connect with my kiddos as like little humans as they are, more and more. Um, yeah. So, um, another thing that was talked about at the Psych Summit was how we can look at feeding goals in different ways.
Mm.
And the Anxious Eaters, Anxious Meal Times course through the Get Permission Institute was like a big eye opener to that because there's like a goal section and kind of some of the goals that they have. And like some of it might be like tolerating change at their table or showing more engagement or more joy in an activity around food. And so, can you kind of share a little bit about how we can have some more like child-led goals to our feeding therapy versus like some that we might think of as being like volume driven or variety driven and that sort of thing we might be more familiar seeing if we're just kind of getting started or in a more traditional feeding clinic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of the things I think about when it comes to goals is, could we write goals for enjoyment? Could we write goals for engagement? Could we write goals for spontaneous interest or leaning in, right? You referenced Marsha Dunn work. Marsha's my professional mentor. She is the creator of the term the positive tilt, when you're like, oh, that looks good. What do you got there, right? Could we write a goal for that type of outcome? Because I think that, when we look at those responsive feeding values, internal motivation is at the heart of responsive feeding. And so, what are the things that fuel internal motivation? Enjoyment, positivity, right? It tastes good. I'm with people I like. I feel safe. I'm having fun. I want to do it again, right? So, I think that our goals need to be focused on helping kids have experiences that are specific to them and that are meaningful to them and that feel good in some way, right? And I also just want to say, for some kids, this might not be like preparing food, right? For some kids, it might be example, a little guy I work with, not so little anymore. Um, he is really interested in eating certain foods, but he's really there's a layer of anxiety and uncertainty. And for him, like when we start talking about food, like maybe we'll like look it up on the computer. And like for him, having that space to ask questions and have his questions answered honestly, and maybe like find a YouTube video of like, we watched a YouTube video of how they make fried chicken the other day because he had no idea what that meant. And he was like, "Oh, this is really interesting. I had no idea." Like those types of experiences, I think can really help kids be in the place to begin to feel that internal motivation. But again, it's specific to the child, and there's not like an agenda of being like, "I'm here and I'm trying you to get to eat the fried chicken." It's like, let's learn about this together.
Do you ever use kind of like that, like, hey, like, do you want to learn about fried chicken? Do you ever like use that as a like to I'm trying to be careful with my word because like we don't want to push or we don't want to like force an interaction, but how do you like facilitate those interactions? And like how do you get to a point where it's like not weird to be like, so do you want to like look up a video of fried chicken? Because
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that those sorts of interactions happen over time with a lot of safe experiences. And I can't emphasize enough the idea that if you're a feeding therapist and you are working with the population of kids that feels anxiety around food, whether it's ARFID, what maybe you might refer to them as picky eaters. I don't like that term, but I'm using it colloquially just because we all sort of know what it means. Um, I think that when you start having experiences with foods that are safe and comfortable and enjoyable, you begin to learn what kids are interested in, and you also begin to have some idea of where you might go. I also do a lot of talking with parents. And sometimes you need the context clues from, mom or dad. Hey, over the weekend, we went to this birthday party and they had pizza. And, he was really interested in the picking the pieces of sausage off the pizza because it looked like the breakfast sausage that he eats at school. And so we're wondering, maybe you could help him make that connection, whatever the thing is, right? And so I think that, part of our job is to be a little bit of a detective about saying like, what experiences are you having? How can I ask some good questions? And then, I don't want to say joke, but I think that one of the roles of a feeding therapist is to provide a little bit of inspiration. This might look different. You might have never tried this before, but it might be kind of interesting. Maybe the food looks good. Maybe the tool is really cool. I can think about kids who've gotten really excited about the vegetable spiralizer or using the crinkle cutter or we have a like mortar and pestle smasher thing, right? All of those things can be ways that kids go, oh, that's interesting, that's cool, I want to do that. And that can be the thing that leads to to experiences. And I'm noticing as we're having this conversation, I feel like I'm being vague and it's a little hard to talk about it. But I really
Yeah.
think that that's one of the inherent parts of being child-led is that you're looking for those sparks of interest and you're running with it and it leads you to a different place. And so it's not prescriptive, it's responsive.
Mm. So, okay, I'm gonna like walk through a hypothetical and see if this would be child-led and responsive. So, um, a kiddo has been really interested in parents' gardens. And so they really enjoy picking the vegetables out of the gardens. And that's kind of where interest is at. So, like, I come in, mom shares this information with me. I decide to cut up one of mom's cucumbers. I have this cute little tackle box with like all my feeding little tools. And so one of them is like some cutters. So, like, I have like my little fruit cutters in my tackle box. And I decide to take one and I make like a star out of my cucumber. My friend, like we have a shared like toy activity out and she's eating her preferred snack. I have these cucumbers that I'm playing around with. And she asks if she could cut one up and make a star. And then I hand it to her. And then we have this like fun little interaction with cucumbers. So with that, it's like even though I'm choosing to have the cucumber, I'm interacting with the cucumber of my own independence. And then she expresses that curiosity and asks to participate, would that be considered like responsive and child-led, or was that like too adult directed? Because like I chose to get out my like feeding tackle box tools and choose a cucumber.
One of the things I heard you say at the beginning of your vignette here is that you recognize that she was really interested in the garden vegetables. So you started with the thing that she was interested in, right?
Mm,
And then you said, "Oh, I bet it would be really like I kind of have a hunch that it might be fun to cut them into shapes because I know your play preferences and I know that shapes are fun and you like craft activities, right?" So that's a very there's a lot of thought that went behind that, right? You weren't saying, this is the thing I have, everyone is doing it today. I'm going to make you cut it into the shape and you're going to eat it, right? There's a playful posture about being like, oh, like, I think you like these things. I have a hunch that it's going to be interesting. I'm going to model it. And then if you think it looks good enough to join me, you're welcome to, right? There's that opportunity to say, yes, I want to do it, or no, I don't want to do it. I can also think about times I've done that activity where kids are like, that's cool, but this is cooler. And then they do something else. And you're like, oh, that was cooler.
hmm
Like, that was a great idea. So, I mean, absolutely. I think that, you know, when I think about good therapy and I think about interactions with kids, it's always this art of like co-creation. Like a therapist has an idea, a parent has an idea, a child has an idea, and then you're all working off of each other and you get to a place that maybe you wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Man, thanks for that validation. I like could cry a little bit from relief because I don't remember where I listened to it, read it, heard it, but it was like if you're doing feeding therapy and it is like adult directed play, which like to me that was adult direct. Like this little girl was not going to choose to cut up a cucumber that day. That was me. That was all me. But it's really had me like questioning some of the stuff that I did because I was like, man, maybe I'm really not as like child-led and responsive as I think. Because like a lot of these things, like you said, there is the forethought to like what are they interested in? How can I interact in this with a way that it might like bring them in? And all of those things. But then at the end of the day, like I still chose to write WWE on a cracker to hold up as like a banner while he was like having a WWE fight, or I decided to make shapes out of the cucumber. So thank you for that.
And I also can think of times where I've done things like that and like it hasn't worked. The child has been like, I'm not interested. I don't like the cucumber today. Your cutter is the wrong shape. And then we say, oh, sorry, like let's try again. And
Yeah.
I appreciate the voices in the feeding community that are asking those questions. I think that those voices, those people are keeping us honest. I think they're holding us to a higher standard. But I also think that as a therapist, you are doing your best to understand a child as an individual, and especially as an OT. My professional training is helping people participate. And so I'm using my occupational therapist client-centered lens to say, how do we engage you in occupations that are meaningful, that are specific, that are developmentally appropriate, that are sensory friendly or sensory meaningful, right? Whatever, and then engage from that lens. So so yeah, I think there's lots of ways that we can look at things, but I'm glad that we're asking those questions and having the conversation because most of us probably can do better at least some of the time.
Yeah. And I have definitely had, always tell parents, like, I have this idea. Here's my idea. There's a good chance it's probably going to blow up in my face because that does happen. But this is this is an idea I have. What do you think? And then we kind of decide if it sounds like a good plan to introduce, implement, talk about, move forward on. Um, but yeah, you can come up with the best food chain or the best activity or like I can see this working out and then if the child doesn't want to, it's not going to work because they have that preference, they have that autonomy, they have the right to tell you no, I don't like that idea.
And I think about times that I've done that with parents and it hasn't worked, and the parents have been like, "Look, now you get it." Right? And it's a
hmm
moment of connection between me and the parent to say like, "Oh, like this is really hard," or I can see, I understand how this happens in your home when I'm not here, or let's have a conversation. And sometimes maybe I do a really good job managing it. Like, and when I say really good, I mean like a therapeutic response. Sometimes I blow it. And I think that those are opportunities for us to have those conversations with parents, reflect on what happened, and then we're all better for it at the end.
Mm. Do Stephanie Cohen next week will be on, and we're gonna really dive into like caregiver coaching and responsive feeding therapy. However, do you coach your parents on how to be more child-led in their homes, or do you just, or is like child-led just something that exists in the therapy space?
Well, when I think about my work overall, parents are a huge part of the work, and parents have to be a huge part of the work because ultimately, at the end of the day, parents are the ones that are feeding kids. So I think that I don't usually specifically use the words child-led, but we are usually very actively talking about a number of concepts that help eating feel better for kids and families. I did a parent call today with a family I just started working with, and this child has a very, very hard time with navigating different environments about eating. So like can't eat in has a really hard time eating in restaurants, needs iPads in certain situations. When he's home, he wants to eat by himself, right? So we had a whole conversation about those specific environmental aspects of what makes eating comfortable for him, what makes eating work for him. We talked about some of the sensory factors, we talked about some of the emotional factors. We talked about the fact that change is hard and like what specific changes, is he navigating? And, again, I didn't necessarily enter that consultation call going, oh, I'm going to coach this parent to be child-led. But I think at the end of the conversation, the parent had a better idea of who their child was, look, by breaking down all of those things. And I think the parent had some very clear ideas about how they could support their child and help meal times feel better. So, so yes, I mean, I think a huge part of therapy is just helping parents understand how they can better support their kids and also just feel confidence in their hearts as they're doing it. Because again, every parent wants to do their best because every parent wants to nourish their child.
Mm. That's one thing that I always try to keep. And I'll probably say this for people that listen into every episode. You'll probably hear me say this multiple times throughout this series. But one thing that I always kind of try to keep at the forefront of my mind. So I'm always transparent with my family. So like I don't have kids yet. I'm not a parent. So I don't know the stress and worry that comes with feeding your child. I can imagine it, but I haven't experienced it for myself. Um, but like as a feeding therapist, like we're meeting these parents in some of the most vulnerable, scary times of their life because like as a parent, you have like one job to keep your child alive. And to do that, you need to make sure they're breathing, they're safe, and they're eating and drinking. And it's like if you're not doing one of those like primary base biological functions, or me, a stranger, is coming and telling you that we might need to change it because maybe it's not the most optimal way, that's just such it's a really vulnerable, intimate place to meet families, and meal times are like they're sacred. They're times that we spent with loved ones. So much of our society like focuses around food for different events like birthday parties and celebrations, graduations, holidays. Um, and so I just always try to keep that at the front of my mind and try to meet those families with like so much empathy and holding space to like listen to them. Because we've talked a lot tonight about the relationship with the child, but you mentioned early on like feeding is a dyad. And so we also have to make sure that we're building that relationship with the parents as well or the caregivers so that we can provide support to the dyad and not just focusing on the child. Um,
And
yeah.
I think a really big part of what you're saying is to first of all, I mean, you just said it, listen to parents, acknowledge, ask good questions, learn about their experience, empathize with them, but then also validate, validate the feelings. I have learned so much from my best friend. My best friend has two kids, both of whom have very different profiles and very different needs. And just watching her become a parent and listening to her reflect on her situation has taught me so much. And I think that, like when I look at her, I've known her over years and years and years, like I know that she is doing her best. And it's the same thing with the families, the parents that I work with. I know that parents are doing their best. Even when they come back and they say, oh, wow, I think this was wrong. Like there is almost always a way that we can see a parent and what they're sharing and their experience. And then there are almost always ways that we can validate either, their experience, their response, the way they're supporting their child, because again that partnership of just being like, hey, we're in it together. I think that can really just be like the most supportive part of the therapeutic relationship.
Mm. Um, I agree. Like, yeah, there's Um, parents are like, so feeding takes a team, but parents are like an integral part to that team. And so like making sure that they do feel heard and connected and part of that team, I think is really important. And as the feeding therapist, that's seeing them every single week or at a more frequent schedule than maybe some of the other people on their feeding team, like I feel like it's up to us to make them really feel like they're not alone, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so so you kind of talked about the structure of your child-led sessions where like you start off having like a movement activity and then you move into like some kind of movement activity and then you move into food and in the kitchen.
So what I want to say is it's different for everyone. So this is not
Okay.
the template for everyone, but
Gotcha,
I would
gotcha.
say for some kids in a certain age bracket who enjoy playing and movement, like that is one of the ways. Um, I work with younger kids, I work with older kids. So again, everybody's different. Everybody has their preferences, but that is potentially one of the formats that sometimes,
Gotcha.
yeah.
I think that's so important to remember that anytime we're working with humans, like it's not a protocol that we can just follow step by step. Um, and that's what I really appreciate about like responsive feeding therapy is that it's like a framework of parameters that we're like working within, but it's not like, oh, in order to do feeding therapy, you have to do A, then B, then C, and now you're implementing the responsive feeding therapy framework. It's more of like values, how we're responding, how we're behaving. Um, Within kind of like those parameters of like the responsive feeding values. So I think that's a really great and important thing to to mention about that.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you for saying that.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a soapbox for another day. So if you were gonna like kind of choose like three kind of like outside of the responsive feeding therapy values, if you were going to kind of like label like what child-led therapy is, like what would be maybe like three keywords that you kind of try to keep in mind when implementing like child-led feeding therapy?
Hmm. Man, only three words. You're talking to someone that likes words a
Oh,
lot.
okay, put it in as many words as you want. Three bullet points.
I can do bullet points. That's better. I felt like for a minute I was trying to like write a poem, like condense all my ideas and to what far too much pressure. I think part of it is you really have to get to know kids as individuals and like not just as the individual coming for feeding therapy, but like the third grader that loves trains, that only eats the McDonald's hamburgers in this certain way, and has a brother, and like this is how they play. Like you need to get to know kids as real people, and you need to relate to them as real people, and their parents as well, right? So I think there's a level of relationship, but I would also say authenticity that goes along with that relationship. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is you need to use that relationship to really learn what's meaningful for the child and start there, right? You don't have to do meaningful things to promote change or feel like you're pushing change or pressuring change, but to be together and to learn how they respond and learn what they like. Because again, when you're engaging in that activity and there's enjoyment and there's connection, like that's therapeutic in itself, right?
Mm.
And then I think the last thing is don't be afraid to make mistakes because if we're being responsive, we are not static clinicians. We are continually changing, adjusting, making it better. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to say, "Oh, I did that wrong," or "Oh, I'm sorry," or "That felt bad," or "I won't do it like that next time." Um, because I think that's part of being a person is that we try our best and we don't know what's going to happen, and then we adjust.
Whenever you do have like a mess up like that in a session where maybe you're and I can't take credit for this. This I learned from the Get Permission Institute. But if your ask was too big, do you like apologize to the child in that moment, or do you just kind of like pivot away, or kind of how do you handle that like in the moment? Because I've definitely had moments with parents where I was like, "Ooh, I messed up today. I did this. My ask was way too big, and I had to like pivot and change it." But I don't know if I've ever had that moment with a patient. I feel like I just kind of be like, oh, we need to move away from this. This was not good. Let's just shift away and then I don't talk about it again.
There's a really famous quote in occupational therapy, and I'm gonna get it wrong. I want to say it was Reggie Baines, who's maybe an NET instructor, and I think the quote is something like, "Whenever you make a mistake, it's an assessment," right? And I think about that all the time because whenever you make a mistake or things didn't work out the way that you thought, it's an opportunity to collect some data. So I think that in itself is
Mm.
valuable. And I think the second thing is you acknowledge the fact that, oh, like that was wrong, or that didn't feel good, or that was unexpected, either to the child or the parent or both. Um, because I mean, we all are sometimes go through life and go, oh, wow, that was wrong, sorry. And so I think being able to acknowledge that, again, it can also be a connective experience. I can think of a little girl I worked with who she was super interested in broccoli because she would eat broccoli at home. So we made broccolis one day, and of course, me being the person that I am, I burned them in the oven because we have a really like fancy oven here that's like really hot, and every once in a while I've messed up and burned things. And it was kind of terrible, but it was also really, really funny. And she was like, "No burned broccolis, no burned broccolis." And we made these like no burned broccoli signs and we put them around the kitchen. And like she thought that was the funniest project. And I'm like, "Yeah," I'm like, "You don't like the burned ones. You only like the roasted ones that don't have the brown edges." And she's like, "Yes." So again, it's kind of a silly example, but like I remember that child. I remember that experience. I am certain that she remembers that experience. And it was really a way for us to connect over that, kind of unfortunate mistake and unpleasant sensory experience that I will own.
Um, so was the only food that you guys worked with that day like the broccoli and then the burnt broccoli? And like in that session?
No, I think we did a lot of things, but
Okay.
she was just really interested in doing that. And so we did it, and then part of the
Yeah.
broccolis were okay at the end and part of them were not okay.
I just I don't know, just kind of thinking about like other ways we can measure goals, like like her ability to express what she didn't like about that was really meaningful, like being able to like know what something burnt was and like label that she didn't like the brown ed or the brown edges or the way it smelled or whatnot. It's like I don't know, it just taught a lot of ways that we can talk about food.
Yeah.
Um, her voicing her preferences so that other people can know like how she does and does not like her broccoli cooked. And then again, like just like finding joy and connection like in a funny mishap moment. Um, let's see. If anybody has any questions, we'll take like maybe one or two if anybody has anything. Um, but one of my last questions for you, Karen, for tonight is that um what do you do if like you're feeling really stuck and like supporting engagement with like a kiddo in a session? Do you have any like tips for bringing that kiddo back in if like you have like made a mistake that like pushed them past like their regulation limits or it took them out of felt safety accidentally? Do you have any like tips for how to like bring them back into the moment? I know with that one kiddo you said that y'all just like called it a day because like mom bringing in those foods was a little too much. But are there ever times that you're able to like repair and get them back in?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I think sometimes it's something as easy as saying like, oh, like we're gonna make it easier, or we're gonna take a break and go play a game, or we're gonna engage in this activity that you really like. Or again, there could be lots of ways that you change maybe your goal, maybe the direction of the session. And I think you hit it on the head, to promote regulation. In some ways, I kind of hate the word regulation because I feel like we're all using it and it has like lost its meaning. But I really think, it's can you come back to a place where you feel good? Maybe you're calm, or you're at least calm enough to play or to engage or whatever the thing is that we're doing here. And sometimes it's, I see that this is hard or this doesn't feel good. And the most therapeutic thing is to help you remove yourself from the situation or give you an option to do something else. And that's okay too. Um, I always think that one of the life skills about being a person is being able to say no, and knowing that your preferences and your voice matters. And so as therapists working with kids, we are the people that enable kids to have those really meaningful experiences, and we can support those experiences therapeutically. So I don't think again, this is the part about being responsive that is making this a hard conversation, because I don't think there's not one right answer. But I think it's the fact that you're acknowledging that and you're responding in a prompt and emotionally supportive way that really is what's important.
Mm. I, yes, I'm so glad that you said that. I was literally having a conversation with somebody today about how like the more that I work with humans, the more I realize that we can't use like a protocol for them. Um, and I like that you really touched on like being like emotionally supportive, like as part of being responsive and like acknowledging those feelings, not just being like, oh, you're fine, it's fine, it's not that big of a deal, you're fine. But like being there to support them through it and then teaching them that it's like okay to be known, they're allowed to have a preference. Because like I have a preference that I really hate olives. And if somebody tried to like make me interact with olives, I'd probably cry. Um, and so like other kids are allowed to have their olives too. And let people know.
Absolutely. I can think of an experience I had a couple years ago where I was going rock climbing. I had done very little rock climbing in my life, but my friends were going. And I was telling someone that I'm going and I'm feeling really nervous. And he looks at me and he's like, "You're fine. You're athletic. Don't be nervous. You're strapped in." And it was the most invalidating and terrible conversation. And it's such a silly example, but I'm like, kids feel the same way when they're telling us it's not okay. And we're like, "Oh, you're fine. You can deal with it." That is the thing that breaks connection. So, I mean, even if we don't understand it, even if we can't make sense of it, we at least need to see them and acknowledge them as people and say, oh, this feels big, or this is hard, or that wasn't right, because that's where that trust starts.
Man, Karen, this was such a great conversation. I feel like I have some better tools in my tool bag, some guiding principles to like help me be a more child-led therapist and to permission to be playful with food, even if it isn't like truly play. So thank you for all of that. I hope that everybody else has enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. Karen, if people would like to reach out to you or learn more from you, where can they find you at?
Yeah, so I'm a part of two organizations that you might be familiar with. One is the Chicago Feeding Group. Maddie, as you mentioned, the Chicago Feeding Group is a 501(c)(3) not-for-profit organization. Our goal is to provide responsive feeding education at low cost. We want to make these ideas accessible to folks. And I want to tell you about our upcoming event because I just pulled it up
Yes.
here before we started. We are so excited to be having Amy Delaney join us. And if, oh, hold on 1 second. I'm so sorry. I had it pulled up in my phone just timed out here. We're having Amy Delaney join us on September 2nd. It's 6:30 Central Time, and she's going to be sharing about her research looking at feeding development and milestones. So we are super excited about that. And then you can also find me at the Get Permission Institute platform. That is a different continuing education platform online. I work there with Marsha Dunn Klein and Stephanie Cohen, and we do all things Get Permission. And there's lots of wonderful talks about Get Permission, and then friends of Get Permission sharing ideas. So they're both places you can find me. You can check out our social media, and it's really wonderful to be able to be part of the feeding community through both of those platforms.
And I just want to plug the Get Permission Institute's like monthly membership. They have monthly mentor meetings, and I got to go to I think like one or two where you got to lead Karen, and they are fabulous. Like you can have like a small group to talk through tricky feeding cases with, which is awesome. And their Get Permission Institute's Instagram is at Get Permission Institute.
Well,
Um,
thanks for saying that.
Absolutely. Super excited for the Amy Delaney uh, course through Chicago Feeding Group. I'm so fascinated by the research she's doing on oral motor development right now. It is so great seeing. Um, and with that, as a reminder for everybody that attended tonight, please complete all sections on the course content page, including the quiz today to earn your live CEUs. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Making Sense with Madi the SLP as we dive into responsive feeding therapy. I see a question if Amy has a website. She does not, but she's at Marquette University. And if you search like Amy Delaney, I think it came out this year, 2026, oral motor development, you can find her part one and part two scoping reviews, which are so great and
Very
just
good. Yeah.
they're fantastic. Um, so as a reminder, or thanks for coming on to Making Sense with Madi the SLP. Make sure to tune in for our next episode where we will be diving into caregiver coaching with responsive feeding therapy with Stephanie Cohen. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming tonight, and thank you so much for your time this evening, Karen.
Oh, thanks for